My name is Arthur Donovan, 56 years old, and for 28 long years I was the Director of Compliance and Risk at Innovatech Solutions, a tech giant headquartered in Austin, Texas. For nearly 3 decades, I dedicated my life to that company. I watched it grow from a small garage startup into a $2.3 billion empire. I was the keeper of secrets, the man who ensured that every contract, every merger, every strategic decision stayed within the law. To most people, I was just another long-time employee, quiet and methodical. They mistook my silence for lack of ambition, my calm for submission. They didn't know I was the company's conscience, the one who knew every vulnerability, every internal deal, every backroom promise. My desk was always tidy, my reports flawless, and my risk assessments saved Innovatech from dozens of multi-million-dollar lawsuits over the years. But everything changed when Lucas Thorne became CEO. At 39, he arrived with a reputation as a disruptor, an expert in aggressive acquisitions and efficient cuts. He brought with him Regina Walsh, an HR director cold as ice, known for her skill in restructuring companies by eliminating veteran staff. Together, they saw Innovatech as a numbers game, not the legacy I had helped build. Over the past 2 years, I began noticing troubling changes. Lucas and Regina ignored my compliance alerts, dodged internal audits I requested, and restructured contracts in suspicious ways that benefited companies with apparent ties to Lucas. My instincts, honed over decades of spotting corporate risk, screamed one word: fraud. Every time I raised a red flag, they dismissed me with hollow phrases about thinking outside the box and not being tied down by outdated bureaucracy. Always with that condescending tone that treated my experience as a liability. But I wasn't a fool. I started documenting everything, every ignored email, every dismissed warning, every meeting where my recommendations were rejected without technical justification. I kept an offline, encrypted archive at home, with copies of all non-compliance reports, incriminating emails, and meeting notes. It was my personal truth journal of Innovatech. I also established a discreet contact with Elias Vance, a former company attorney who had left years earlier over ethical concerns. Elias was a man of integrity, with strong connections at the Department of Justice. I created a security protocol. If anything happened to me, a package of key documents would be automatically sent to him. On the morning of March 15, 2024, I received an email from Regina requesting a meeting to discuss my career. I knew it wasn't good. My instincts never failed me. I walked into the room and found Lucas seated behind Regina's desk like he owned the place. Regina stood beside him, folder in hand, wearing that icy smile I had come to despise. Lucas got straight to the point, not even looking up from his laptop. My position was being eliminated. Restructuring. I was too expensive, he said, and they needed someone with a more modern mindset. Regina slid my severance package across the desk with all the warmth of a utility bill. I had until the end of the day to clear out my office. I felt the blow of 28 years vanish in seconds, but I didn't explode, I didn't shout, I didn't beg. I calmly said I understood and would be available for any necessary transition. Lucas finally looked up, clearly expecting a more dramatic reaction. He asked if that was all. I confirmed it was and stood up from my chair. As I walked toward the door, a cold clarity settled over me. They had no idea what they had just done. They didn't know I was the only one who knew the irregularities they'd been covering up. They didn't know I had documented every suspicious move they made. And most of all, they didn't know I'd been preparing for this exact moment. I returned to my desk and began packing my belongings with the same methodical care as always. But inside, I was activating a plan I had prepared for months. I called Elias from a payphone in the parking lot. "Elias, it's Arthur. It happened." "They fired me today," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I understand," he replied, his voice serious. "Is the package live?" "Yes. You should receive everything within 24 hours, I confirmed. Documents, emails, audio recordings from meetings where I raised the issues. Everything." Elias asked if I was sure about what I was doing. I told him I was absolutely sure. I explained that I wasn't fired because of restructuring. I was fired because I was the only one who knew the truth. Over the past 6 months, I had uncovered the full scope of the corruption. Lucas and Regina weren't just cutting costs. They were orchestrating a fund diversion scheme through inflated contracts with shell companies. Miller and Associates, Quantum Consulting, Apex Solutions, all of them were fronts controlled by Lucas through strawmen. Consulting contracts worth $500,000 for services that were never rendered. The worst part, they had infiltrated the board of directors. 3 out of 7 members were receiving disguised payouts as special fees to approve the transactions. It was a sophisticated money laundering scheme that had already siphoned over $15 million from Innovatech. My dismissal wasn't a coincidence. It was the final move to eliminate the only person who had full access to the financial systems and enough knowledge to connect the dots. They thought I was just an old, harmless employee, but they didn't know I had secretly recorded the meetings where I raised concerns, using a small device I always carried in my pocket. I left the company that afternoon carrying only a small box with personal photos and a cactus I had cared for over the years. But what I was truly carrying was something far more valuable: meticulously documented truth. 2 weeks later, the first signs of chaos appeared. The external audits I had scheduled before my termination arrived. Deloitte began asking questions that Lucas and Regina couldn't answer. They wanted to know where the compliance reports from the last 6 months were and who had approved the suspicious contracts. I had programmed the compliance system like a ticking time bomb. Automated reports were set to trigger to investors, auditors, and regulatory bodies anytime suspicious transactions were detected. Without my oversight to manage those alerts, they began to pile up like an avalanche. Lucas's phone rang nonstop. Investors, SEC auditors, financial journalists, everyone wanted answers about the aggressive restructuring and the inconsistencies being uncovered in the financial reports. That's when Regina called me. Her voice, usually cold and controlled, was trembling. She said we needed to talk, that there were some misunderstandings that could be cleared up. Misunderstandings? I asked calmly. Regina explained that perhaps they had acted too hastily. Lucas was willing to reconsider my position. They could offer a promotion, a substantial raise. Regina, my loyalty has always been to Innovatech, not to you two, I replied. And now, if you'll excuse me, I have a consultation to prepare. What consultation? She asked, panic clearly rising in her voice. I explained it was for the SEC. They were interested in better understanding the company's compliance processes. Coincidentally, they had quite a few questions about transactions I had flagged as irregular. The silence on the other end was deafening. She hung up without another word. The next day, Elias called me with news that made me smile for the first time in weeks. He said I wouldn't believe it. Lucas and Regina had contacted him offering a $2 million consulting contract to help resolve Innovatech's internal issues. They wanted him to find a way to reverse the situation. And what did you say? I asked. I said I already have a client, Elias replied, and that truth is not for sale. 3 weeks after my termination, Elias submitted the full evidence package to the SEC and the FBI. It contained over 400 pages of documents, including internal emails, bank statements I had obtained through my contacts in the finance department, audio recordings where I warned about the irregularities, and a detailed report connecting all the puzzle pieces. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. Innovatech was in the middle of a secondary public offering, trying to raise $300 million for expansion. Investors were already nervous about the inconsistencies appearing in the quarterly reports. When news of a federal investigation leaked, it was like throwing gasoline on a fire. Innovatech's stock plummeted 40% in 2 days. The public offering was canceled. Major institutional investors, BlackRock, Vanguard, Fidelity, began dumping their positions. The board of directors went into full panic mode. That's when Lucas tried to intimidate me directly. He showed up at my house on a Saturday morning, flanked by 2 expensive lawyers in Armani suits. He said I had violated confidentiality clauses and would face lawsuits for sabotage and defamation if I continued talking too much. "Arthur, you're destroying a company you dedicated your life to building," Lucas said, trying to sound reasonable. "Think of the 3,000 employees who will lose their jobs because of your personal vendetta." I looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Lucas, my loyalty has always been to Innovatech and to its honest employees. If the company is being destroyed, it's not because of me. It's because of your greed." He made one last attempt, offering a $5 million settlement for me to clarify the misunderstandings publicly and stop cooperating with the investigations. One of the lawyers already had the paperwork ready. "There are no misunderstandings," I replied calmly. "Only documented crimes. And I don't negotiate with criminals." Lucas stormed out of my house red with rage, shouting empty threats about serious consequences. I closed the door and immediately called Elias to report the intimidation attempt. One more piece of evidence for the prosecutor's file. 1 week later, search and seizure warrants were executed simultaneously at Innovatech's offices, Lucas's home in Westlake Hills, and Regina's apartment in downtown Austin. The FBI confiscated computers, documents, cell phones, everything. Images of federal agents carrying boxes of evidence made the front page of every local newspaper. The Wall Street Journal ran the headline story, "Innovatech Executives Under Investigation for $15 million Scheme." The Austin American-Statesman revealed details about the shell companies and illicit payments to board members. CNBC aired a special report on how a fired veteran employee had exposed the entire operation. Regina was the first to crack. Facing up to 20 years in federal prison for money laundering and wire fraud, she took a plea deal. She gave up everything: offshore bank accounts, encrypted communications with Lucas, details on how they recruited the corrupt board members. In exchange, her sentence was reduced to 5 years. Lucas's trial was a spectacle. For 3 weeks, federal prosecutors presented the evidence I had meticulously gathered. My recordings were played in full. My compliance reports were read aloud. The jury heard Lucas fire me over the phone, a call I had secretly recorded, in which he admitted I knew too much about the new operational directives. The most damning moment was when they played a conversation between Lucas and a board member, where Lucas said, "Arthur is a problem. He has access to everything and asks too many questions. We need to get rid of him before he connects the dots." Lucas was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. Regina served 4.5 years. The 3 corrupt board members received between 8 and 12 years each. Fines totaled $45 million. Innovatech went bankrupt 6 months after the convictions. Its assets were auctioned off to pay creditors and compensate defrauded investors. A company I had spent 28 years helping to build ceased to exist in a matter of months. But the story didn't end there. My reputation as the man who doesn't stay silent in the face of corruption spread throughout Silicon Valley. I was approached by Cypress Capital, an ethical investment fund focused on sustainable tech, to become their director of corporate integrity. My salary was 60% higher than what I earned at Innovatech, and my role was exactly what I had always done: ensure companies did the right thing. Over the next 5 years, I helped Cypress identify and avoid investments in more than a dozen companies with questionable practices. We saved our investors from potential losses that could have reached $200 million. My experience at Innovatech became a business school case study on the importance of corporate governance. 2 years after the convictions, I received an unexpected call. It was Marcus Chen, a young investigative journalist from the Austin Business Journal. He was writing a piece on the lasting impact of the Innovatech scandal on the Texas startup ecosystem. "Mr. Donovan, I'd like your perspective on how the case changed investor attitudes toward corporate governance," Marcus said. During our 2-hour conversation, he told me something that truly surprised me. Over the past 18 months, more than 30 tech companies in Texas had hired new directors of compliance or internal audit, citing the Innovatech case as their motivation. My story had become a cautionary tale for the entire industry. "Do you realize you've become a legend in the corporate world?" Marcus asked. "There's even a phrase executives use now: Don't pull an Innovatech. It means, don't underestimate experienced employees or ignore compliance red flags. I smiled at that. It wasn't the kind of fame I had sought, but it was satisfying to know my experience was helping protect other companies and employees. At Cypress Capital, I had developed what we called the Donovan Protocol, a behavioral auditing system that analyzed not just numbers, but communication patterns, sudden organizational shifts, and cultural red flags. It was based on everything I had learned from watching Innovatech's ethical collapse. 3 years after the convictions, I was invited to give a guest lecture at the University of Texas at Austin, at the McCombs School of Business. The auditorium was packed, 400 MBA students, professors, and local executives. The lecture was titled, Integrity as Competitive Advantage, Lessons from a Career in Compliance. During the presentation, I shared not only the story of Innovatech, but the deeper lessons I had learned. I explained how experience and intuition developed over decades are irreplaceable in detecting sophisticated fraud, how meticulous documentation and strategic patience are more powerful than any emotional reaction. A student raised her hand during the Q&A session. Mr. Donovan, don't you feel your revenge was disproportionate? After all, 3,000 people lost their jobs when Innovatech collapsed. Young lady, that wasn't revenge, I replied calmly. It was justice. If 3,000 people lost their jobs, it's because Lucas and Regina built a company on rotten foundations. I simply documented the truth. The consequences were a result of their actions, not mine. I explained that the real tragedy would have been allowing the scheme to continue. Eventually, it would have collapsed anyway, but with much greater losses for investors, retirees, and employees. My actions merely accelerated the inevitable, but saved millions of dollars that would have otherwise been stolen. After the lecture, I was approached by Janet Morrison, an executive from Integrity Partners, one of the largest corporate governance consulting firms in the United States. She offered me a position as senior partner, leading a new division focused on early detection of corporate fraud. Arthur, your reputation has opened doors we didn't even know existed, Janet said. We have Fortune 500 clients specifically requesting the Donovan method to audit their operations. You've turned a traumatic experience into a unique competitive edge. I accepted the offer. Over the next 4 years, my team audited more than 200 companies. We uncovered fraud schemes in 18 of them, involving a total of $340 million in irregularities. Every case we prevented saved investors, employees, and consumers from devastating losses. The most fulfilling part was training the next generation of auditors. I taught that experience isn't just time served. It's the ability to recognize patterns, to trust honed instincts, to connect dots others don't even see. I showed them how seasoned professionals are a company's immune system, protecting it from ethical infection. 5 years after the trial ended, I received news that gave me a quiet sense of closure. Lucas Thorne had been transferred to a medium-security prison in Beaumont, Texas. At 49, he worked in the prison library, organizing books for 8 hours a day. His parole would be reviewed in 2041, when he turned 65. Regina Walsh had served her reduced sentence and was released, but her professional life was in ruins. She worked as an administrative assistant at a small accounting firm in San Antonio, earning 1/10 of what she made at Innovatech. No mid- or large-sized company would hire her due to her criminal record. The 3 corrupt board members were still serving their sentences. Their personal fortunes had been seized to compensate victims. Families destroyed, reputations ruined, legacies permanently stained. In 2029, 10 years after my dismissal from Innovatech, I was honored by the Texas Association of Internal Auditors with the Integrity Professional of the Decade Award. During the acceptance speech, I reflected on the journey that had brought me there. When I was fired at age 56 after 28 years of service, I thought my career was over. I told an audience of 800 professionals. They wrote me off as an outdated cost, an obstacle to their ambitions. But they learned that experience is more than tenure. It's accumulated wisdom. And integrity isn't weakness, It's the most powerful force in the corporate world. I explained that I never sought revenge. I sought justice. The difference is that revenge is emotional and destructive, while justice is systematic and constructive. My revenge was living well, thriving, and using my experience to protect others. Today, at 66, I'm recognized as one of the leading experts in corporate fraud detection in the United States. My book, The Guardian of Truth: How Experience Defeats Corruption, has become required reading in MBA programs. I speak at international conferences, train executives, and continue protecting companies from their own demons. Innovatech Solutions is now just a footnote in the corporate history of Texas. But the lessons it taught live on. Seasoned employees should never be discarded. They should be valued for what they truly are: the institutional memory, the ethical conscience, and the guardians of integrity. Lucas and Regina thought I was nothing when they fired me. They discovered I was everything, the ethical foundation the company should have been built on. They tried to erase me from Innovatech's history, but in the end, they were the ones erased by the story I documented. The best revenge isn't destroying your enemy. It's building something better from the ruins of injustice. It's turning pain into purpose, betrayal into wisdom, and underestimated experience into a weapon of protection for others. If you've made it this far, leave a comment and tell me, have you ever been in a situation where your experience was underestimated? How did you respond? And if this story inspired you in any way, don't forget to like this video. It really helps me keep sharing stories like this. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next case, and share this with someone who needs to know that experience and integrity always win in the end. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.